Hi, folks, and welcome to First Bite, Fed, Fun, and Functional, a speech therapy podcast sponsored by SpeechTherapyPD.com. I am your host on this nerd venture, Michelle Dawson, MS, CCC, SLP, CLC, the All Things Peds SLP. I am a colleague in the trenches of home health early intervention right there with you. I run my own private practice, Heartwood Speech Therapy, here in Culvertown, South Carolina, and I guest lecture nationwide on best practices for early intervention for the medically complex and fragile child. First Bite's mission is short and sweet, to bring light, hope, knowledge, and joy to the pediatric clinician, parent, or advocate.
By way of a nerdy conversation, so there's plenty of laughter too.
In this podcast, we cover everything from AAC to breastfeeding,
ethics on how to run a private practice,
pediatric dysphagia to clinical supervision,
and all other topics in the world of pediatric speech pathology. Our goal is to bring evidence-based practice straight to you by interviewing subject matter experts,
to break down the communication barriers so that we can access the knowledge of their fields.
Or, as a close friend says, to build the bridge.
By bringing other professionals and experts in our field together, we hope to spark advocacy, joy, and passion for continuing to grow and advance care for our little ones.
Every fourth episode, I join in. I'm Erin Forward, MSP, CCC, SLP, the Yankee by way of Rochester, New York transplant who actually inspired this journey. I bring a different perspective, that of a newish clinician with experience in early intervention, pediatric acute care, and nonprofit pediatric outpatient settings.
So sit back, relax, and watch out for all our squirrels and enjoy this geeky gig brought to you by SpeechTherapyPD.com. Hi, my name is Michelle Linwood Dawson, and these are my financial disclosures. I am the author of Chasing the Swallow, Truth, Science, Hope for Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders, for which I receive royalties from the sale of. I receive compensation from SpeechTherapyPD.com for CEUs associated with the book, for this podcast, First Bite, as well as for numerous other presentations. I receive compensation from PESI for one course that I have with them. I receive an annual salary from Wolf Speech Therapy Plus LLC, as well as in my capacity as adjunct professor at North Carolina Central University. And I receive profits from the sales of First Bite Boutique sweatshirts and t-shirts that Erin and I design that is not affiliated with First Bite, the podcast, which is sponsored by SpeechTherapyPD.com. My non-financial disclosures. I am topic chair for the Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders for ASHA for the 2024-2023 convention. I am the chair of the special interest group, or co-chair of the special interest group for pediatric feeding disorders and dysphagia for the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia. I am a convention committee member for the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia. I am a member of the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia. I'm a board of trustee member with the Communication Disorder Foundation of Virginia. I'm a former treasurer with the Council of State Association Presidents, past president of the South Carolina Speech Language Hearing Association. I am a member of ASHA, ASHA SIG 10, ASHA SIG 13, SCISHA, Dysphagia Research Society, National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders, and the National Black Association of Speech, Language, and Hearing.
Okay. My name's Erin Forward, and here are my disclosures. Financial disclosures. I receive a salary from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. I am the owner of Forward Education LLC, where I do courses. I receive royalties from Speech Therapy PD for this podcast, First Bite, and other presentations as well. I am also a owner of First Bite Boutique with Michelle Dawson and receive compensation for that, which is also not associated with First Bite podcast, sponsored by Speech Therapy PD. Non-financial disclosures. I am a contributor for the book Chasing the Swallow by Michelle Dawson. I am a member of the South Carolina Coalition for DIR Floor Time. I am a member of ASHA and SIG 13, as well as Dysphagia Outreach Project and Feeding Matters. And I think that's it.
Huzzah! Thanks, y'all. Thanks for sticking around to listen all the way through to the disclosures. Yay!
The views and opinions expressed in today's podcast do not reflect the organizations associated with the speakers and are their views and opinions solely.
Okie dokie, everybody. I mean, I like to pretend I don't say that at the beginning of every episode, but holy cats, I do every single time. But anywho, we are back. And by we, Erin and I finally adulted enough that we're in the same time zone, doing the same thing, and both accessible to internet and computers. So here we are back again. Yay. Hi, Erin.
Hello.
So behind the scenes, all the things have happened in our lives. I can tell you my HVAC system flooded the basement. We grew black mold, had to have the entire thing gutted, found a pocket door that we didn't know existed in the wall, but we found out it existed when they took the door out because it had mold all over it. Yep, that was fun. And if memory serves correct, we record in advance. This week is ASHA, and you get to be there doing your magical thing. And with a very full heart, I am sending all of my love. Full disclosure, get your mammograms. I had one hell of a health scare. It was very, very scary, and we ran all of the tests. And my radiologist geeked out because apparently my left boobie grew a lymph node where it's not supposed to be, because lymph nodes are not supposed to be in your boobs. Yep, they don't grow there. So, moral of the story, get your mammograms and do all of the follow-ups. You too may meet your insurance deductible in the process of doing the comprehensive follow-ups, but ASHA conventions will always be there. So if you have to sit one out, guess what? It'll be there next year. And Erin, I am sad that the first opportunity we have to co-present, I will be in Virginia. So all the loves.
Yeah. We'll make it. Well, I'm going to make you do a little video or something so they'll at least see your face.
Yes, fair. But how are you? How's your world? Mine's been a glorious dumpster fire, but we've chosen joy and we're going to make it. So how are you?
Yeah. I'm, surviving. I significantly overcommitted this semester, this quarter, I guess you would call it. Mm-hmm. I'm taking 2 classes and teaching 1 class. So I'm in class like 7 hours a week on top of working 40 hours. So we're just going to learn some lessons, maybe not. Yeah, I will have 3 presentations at ASHA. 2 were supposed to be co-presenters, but they will all be solo. So anybody wants to come join, because I'll be up there on my own. I'd love to see all of y'all. I'll be speech therapy PD booth, at the Gestalt Goodness booth.
Farwell, we love you. We are like biggest fans.
So yeah, life is hard, but we're surviving. Yeah.
Beautiful. How's Cola Kitty?
She's needy as ever. She's good. She's good.
Yeah.
She acts like I never feed her, but I do. So she got a nice brand new little scratching post the other day that she can like sleep on. So she better like it because I spent $50 on it. So, but it's supposed to last a really long time. So
love that. Every time we think about getting something for the cats, they just want to play in the Amazon box. And I'm like,
no, I mean, boxes are great too. Yes.
Yes. Well, then you have to fight bear and goose over the box. So it's like, who wins? Purr, Patty, goose, or bear? That's fantastic. Dog is out. Dog is done. Okay. Well, y'all, today is all about goal writing. Dun, dun, dun. I gotta be honest, I hate goal writing. It is literally my least favorite thing to do as a therapist, is to come up with goals, because
but it's very important.
I know it is. And it's important for a lot of different reasons. So big picture, yes, we're writing measurable goals to chart progress, right? But your Goals do more than that. So if we step back and look at our goals, if you're working in a private practice, your goals could support services and implementation within the public schools. If you're in early intervention, your goals have to be written than if you're in a private practice, than if you're in the public schools, than if you're in inpatient. But all of our goals need to be written with a couple of recommendations in mind. One, we need to remove our ableist language from them. We need to remove our deficits based measurements from them. And we need to make sure that our goals are written from a neurodiversity affirming, trauma informed care lens. Here's it summarized in very layman's terms. If your caregivers don't understand it and they don't feel like it's honoring and uplifting what their child can do and helping them to get to the next step, then the goals need to be rewritten. And that's a lot to take in within the first 6 minutes of a podcast. So you want a part and parcel? Let's break that apart. How about that?
Well, and I always say too, I mean, goals are a window into like your own therapy and what you're doing. And unfortunately, I think in the past, we have written goals for things we're not really doing.
Yeah.
Like we write goals for what we're told the child should be doing. We write goals for, don't even get me started with writing goals from a standardized language test. That is not helpful. And so we need to start writing goals for what we're actually doing and where the child actually is. Because the amount of times I think, especially when I started, where I'd write a goal and I'd have to write this huge O or this huge A in my note because I had to explain so much. Huh?
Or I was translating the huge A.
Yeah. So, I'd respond to the goal. Oftentimes it would be like, they didn't do it. And then I would write what we actually did in my assessment portion of my note. And why wasn't I writing goals for what we were actually doing? And so that's a big shift that I've made. And it can be challenging because you might think you're writing goals for things that are outside of your scope, and they're not. It's all about how you frame them. And it's all about your wording. And remember, insurance doesn't change what they cover unless you start to write things differently. Like they aren't going to understand what you're doing unless you start to make the shift in your writing. And insurance not approving something is also an opportunity for you to have a conversation with them. I've written a lot of goals that I haven't really had issues. If you do have issues, again, that's an opportunity, but I write goals for the child to experience joy with caregiver during mealtime, and I've never had an issue with it. So thinking about.
But that falls under the psychosocial domain of pediatric feeding disorder, and you can quantify that.
Right. Right. And a lot of that also, what we will say when we're talking about writing goals is having evidence in your plan of care for why you're doing what you're doing, and citing some of that information that also gives insurance and people that are reading your reports even more insight into the lens that you're using to treat that child.
Okay. So, we love our evidence. So where do we pull our data points from? Well, let's start with your guidelines and their guidelines. The developmental feeding milestones are easily accessible on ASH's website. They came out this year. They are an amazing starting point. They give broad guidelines according to upper middle class white mealtime habits and practices, right? But they're a starting point. They don't really take into consideration feeding skills that don't include utilizing utensils, or feeding skills that don't include different cultural considerations, such as, I know in India, some of the well-to-do families, they don't have the cups touch their lip when they're drinking. They're part of their caste. They pour the liquid into their mouth. Those kinds of considerations are not in the feeding skill norms yet. And we're going to put a yet on there because we're claiming joy and that somebody somewhere will share their mealtime practices and customs and help grow these, right? In the interim, we have these as a starting guideline. Now, when it comes to writing goals, ASHA has numerous publications out on SMART goals. You can check the ASHA leaders. If you've been to any of my courses, I know that if you scan the QR code, that pops directly over to the references. Another great starting point for goal writing, their DIR floor time, if you're a floor timer, they have examples of goals within their framework, but also I know, and I can say this because I'm proud of her. Erin just did like a 4-hour talk with speech therapy PD specifically on goal writing and goes in depth into resources and how she has evolved her goals over time. And I really do like your goals.
Which, for those of you that stuck with me, it is a reschedule because I was supposed to have a talk. I drove 8 hours home, went to my friend's wedding, and developed a pretty horrible migraine. So for those of you that have came to that second talk, I appreciate it because I was very sad that I couldn't give it the next day. But I get those like once a month. But anyway,
migraines, not weddings.
Weddings, yes.
You went to a lot of weddings this year too. So
I went to a lot of and even who we write goals for. I will say that I write a lot more goals for myself and caregivers than I used to, and we'll get into it a little bit. But if we are caregiver coaching, why do we not have more goals for the caregiver? Like why? And not to put more on the caregiver, but more so to help them shift. I'm not asking the caregiver to do more. I'm just asking the caregiver to maybe do a little different. But why are we just writing goals for caregiver will follow through with plan of care and recommendations? What are those recommendations? What are you telling that caregiver? And how are they responding to that? That's a huge part of your session. That should be in the objective.
Yes. Also, on that note, family guided routines based intervention, fgrbi.com, great resource. You can find sample goals there. I'm going to butcher this. Epic 5Q, I think is the correct analogy. Dr. Burns, I totally forgot the name of it, but Epic 5Q has amazing resources for goal writing for early intervention. And remember, EI goes up to 5 and 6 for some of our little ones. So this doesn't cut at 3. So those are our go-to for resources for when we need our cups filled.
Yeah. Rachel Dorsey has some good stuff on goal writing. Amy, I'm so close with her. I'm going to butcher her name. Amy Zembrisky is how you say her name. She has a really great resource on neurodiversity affirming goal writing, a really nice goal bank. She does a lot of AAC as well, which is really helpful, but it's allowing us to step outside of our box a little bit and be more creative with goals, which is challenging because yes, there's these resources. Amy has a goal bank, for example, because it's nice to see goals. I've developed like a feeding goal bank that I'm still working on, but if you email me, if you want like a copy of it, of like a smaller version of it, but it's more so to give examples. Unfortunately, with goal writing, it needs to be pretty individualized. So you're going to pull from your resources, but there's not going to be something that's like, you're not going to have a goal that you can just pull for every kid. That's not trauma informed. That's not neurodiversity affirming. That's not strengths based. People always ask me, what's a trauma informed goal? And my answer is always the same goal written the same way could be trauma informed for one child and not trauma informed for the other. What makes it trauma informed is that you write it with the knowledge and understanding of that child, what makes them feel safe, making sure we're offering them choices and empowerment. And so what I will also say about goal writing is that and Michelle taught me this too. It's, when I write goals initially in the plan of care, I will put in my plan of care goals. I have a kind of statement like goals to be adjusted and changed as SLP continues to build individual profile of child and understanding of what best is going to support them, or continuing to do diagnostic therapy may result in adjustment of goals to best support child. So you have something written so you don't feel stuck.
Locked in.
Because how often I have so many conversations where these clinicians feel like they're locked into these goals, and that's just not supportive of children. That's not supportive of how we get to know them. That's not supportive of just them. I have a caregiver I work with. I've said this in another episode, but she was working with a speech therapist, and the child was not making progress. She didn't feel like the goals were really supportive of him. She talked with the speech therapist about it. The speech therapist said, well, these are our goals. And so this mom called insurance and said, hey, don't approve this plan of care. This speech therapist needs to change their goals. Do I think that caregivers need to be doing that? I don't think they should have to be doing that. But if a caregiver is saying to you, this isn't working, it's not working, and you have to adjust and you have to shift, we need to stop putting kids into these boxes of what we feel they need to be accomplishing. And if you look at your goals, you have to look for that deficits-based ableist language that might be present there, which can be really challenging. But is your goal supportive of this child, or is your goal supportive of neurotypical norms? Those are two very different things.
And is it responsive to where those caregivers are in that season of their life?
Yeah.
So I'm going to borrow, I think the best way to maybe frame this conversation is to go through like hypothetical case, right?
Yeah.
So,
because I think that we can give you goals, but that's not going to be the most supportive. Michelle and I talk so much about like critical thinking. And so how can we think critically about a specific case so you can see our thought process in goals? I agree. I think that can be helpful.
yes, yes. Okay, so one of the little ones that's on my caseload right now, she is so sweet, but so shy, so painfully shy. I truly think that this little girl has selective mutism, which is commonly diagnosed between the ages of 2 and 4, and she's 3. And her pediatrician told her caregiver that she was too young for that diagnosis, which is factually incorrect information.
Also, wait, I will say, just to alert our audience, I attended and spoke at the Floor Time conference, and Jolene Fernard and she's spoken for speech therapy PD. She's done some lectures. She works a lot with selective mutism and autism in Floor Time. The community is now shifting for a situational mutism.
Oh, I didn't know this.
I just heard of it at the Floor Time conference, basically saying it's not that this isn't a choice. This is based on situation and where I am and how I feel. And so I thought that was very interesting. And again, this is a good example of like, we're sitting here having a conversation. I learned something. I'm sharing it.
Yes.
Once I learned this. Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Yes. She's fantastic. But I think, again, this is a language that was accepted. Now we're going to shift. And now I have this knowledge, and now we can talk about it a little bit differently. So
it's situational
mutism is a new term that the American Psychological Association still uses selective mutism, but the community is pushing for a shift in that terminology.
Okay. All right. Well, I made a note and texted it to you. Okay. Well, Little Bitty Bugaboo presents with characteristics of. She's in OT for sensory processing disorder, as well as some fine motor delays, a little bit of praxis. She's so sweet, but she won't talk to me. She'll whisper to her mom around me, and we've been working together for months, but I'm still unknown. I mean, you only see me once a week for like a hot minute. The caregiver came, and I break down my PFD eval according to the 4 domains and chart according to the 4 domains. So I've got her nutrition has on the surface, it's been compromised because we have a very self limiting diet. Our feeding skill was compromised because we have a known delay with a fine motor, compromising utensil use and those factors. Medical, she's has no true known medical etiology driving everything. We're full term, we're healthy, no official diagnosis outside of SPD, sensory processing disorder. And I included characteristics of, and I wrote selective mutism because this is what I saw, but knowing that is that medical or is that psychosocial? So I charted it in both. Psych has to document this, but pediatricians should be aware. And so when I wrote my goals for this child, I did my eval, and my second session is the routines based interview because she's 3. So I do my eval, write everything up with the caregivers report. I kind of draft goals during that session. And then in my second session, draft goals for the eval. But in my second session, I host the routines based interview. And I go through and talk to me about what it looks like during mealtime at your home. What does that actually look like? And y'all, I gathered so much information about how mom and dad work different shifts, about how at the time we started therapy, there was different adults in the home that are no longer there, about how some meals are at the kitchen table, some meals are around the coffee table in the living room, some meals are with and without TV, the extent to which the child is involved in meal prep. Now, this is important because within the framework of early intervention and within the framework of those early childhood special education classes, in order to qualify for services in those areas, children partake in a 5-domain test, right? A common one is the Patel Developmental Inventory. It looks at gross motor, fine motor, language, cog, and self help skills, the ADLs. So when I'm doing my assessment and doing the routines based interview, I want to know, does the child help with meal prep? Do they pick their own food out? If you hold 2 foods up or 2 drinks up, can they select? Are they helping to stir? Are they helping to open the utensil drawer, open a can of food? Do they set the table? Do they put the food that they want, their own portion size, on their own plate? Do they scrape their plate at night or do they throw their plates away if it's paper? These are incredibly rich and deep conversations, but it culminates in goal writing for independence with meal prep. And then I start clarifying, according to what the caregivers want. And mom was like, I would really like it if she could help me set the table. Because there's no pressure for her to eat right then. She's just getting exposure. Clinically, I'm thinking, hey, that's great systematic desensitization. She's being exposed to it. There's no pressure on it going in her body. It's just a self help skill that overlaps with OT, setting the table, but this is invaluable. So when we're talking about writing goals, the goals that I have for this child, if you look at my plan of care, the first goals are my caregiver coaching goal. My second goal for this child is that she's going to participate in meal prep as evidenced by, and then I give some examples per caregiver reporting for 3 consecutive speech therapy sessions. And it's awesome because mom comes back and she's like, she did a really good job this week. And she helped us wash the dishes after dinner. She did a great job this week and she scooped. Dad has worked as a chef. And so, like, they have like crazy pasta, like homemade noodles. And I mean, the way he did something lemon, it was a lemon pasta. Erin, it was like an Italian meal,
Mhm.
right? But that's an example of a strengths based goal. It's building on what she can do. It incorporates what the caregiver would like to see her do. It sets her up for success with life. And there's no pressure for her to actually be force fed or consume this food. It's it's a beautiful starting point, and it just makes my heart happy to see that she's thriving with this little goal. So,
Mhm. Yeah,
case in point.
I've started using, and I have not heard anyone use this term before. I needed a term for talking about what I was doing. I used to use the term food literacy, but when I really dove into food literacy, it was more understanding about food and the nutrients and what food is good and bad, which I don't love. So I started talking about mealtime literacy in the
Mm-hmm.
understanding of like, what's a child's understanding of mealtime? But because I have been talking about it, like my definition of it is their pathway to learning about food that feels authentic to them, or learning about mealtime
Ooh.
and how they want to engage in mealtime that feels authentic to who they are as a person. Our job is not to make a child eat. Our job is to help
Yes.
children learn about how they want to learn about mealtime. That might even be a child who, and I feel like this happens more as they get older, that might even be a child who doesn't really love food, right? They don't love it. But they love to play soccer. And so we help support the understanding of, hey, when you get a headache before soccer practice, that
Mm-hmm.
might be because you're hungry. And
Mm-hmm.
eating food helps fuel our body to be able to run really fast on the soccer field. So
Yes.
maybe my goal is for a child will, you know, engage with SLP in will participate in conversations regarding what food does for our body. Like maybe that's just what we learn about. And so I like use this term with caregivers too, because I think it can be really helpful. And I think it also helps us understand all those pieces that lead up to mealtime and eating. Like there's so much foundation that needs to happen. And I used to write goals for only how much I used to only write goals for like, yes, engaging sensory wise with food, but also putting it in my mouth. To Michelle's point, what about setting the table? What about how a child wants to learn about food? And like I talk a lot about this in my course of what is the child interested in? How do they engage with the world? And how can I support that? If I have a child and if their strength is reading, they're hyperlexic, right? They like to read books. Maybe I have a lot of children that get really excited about reading like labels.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I write a goal for both caregiver and child in this instance. So maybe I write a goal for caregiver. Caregiver will support child's interest in reading to learn about different packaging of food. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
write a goal for child. Child will, I mean, again, we're coming up with all of these on the spot. We don't have these written, but like maybe I'll write a goal for child talking about how they will engage in session or engage in picking out food at the grocery store based on packaging, because
Yes.
that's something that they're interested in and we can learn about food that way. Again, only if this is something, it's trauma informed if I know that this is something that feels safe for them or it was in their zone of proximal development. But that's strengths based, that's building off of their interest. If they're showing interest in packaging then and reading, I even write goals for like, caregiver will support mealtime literacy by reading books about food with their child. Caregiver
Yes.
will support mealtime literacy by watching shows that include food with their child and expanding meaning in that way. So I'm also writing goals for like, how can I help this caregiver make little shifts to support this child's learning about food based on their strengths, based on what they care about, based on their interests. That's where that strength base come from. It's not like, let me look at eating food and what are they good at with eating food. Let's also pull from these other things they're good at to support feeding that's challenging for them.
I have a couple that I've written where the child, with caregiver support, child will select recipe
Mm-hmm.
for 3 consecutive speech therapy sessions. And when you're selecting the recipe, you can carry this over into real world of they pick out the recipe, then they've got to go buy the ingredients, they have to touch the ingredients, they have to experience the grocery store, they're bringing it back, and then they might not want to engage in the meal prep, but we have gotten it that far. Melissa from Mississippi, huzzah, Melissa from Mississippi calls it store to table. And I think that's brilliant, but like that's a great way of looking at it
Yeah.
as we're having that real world exposure. But also, y'all, we are feeding therapists, but we're speech language
Yeah.
pathologists. The language that can be embedded in this. And to piggyback on my sessions where I have children that have a language delay and that also utilize a communication device, we might write a goal for child will describe food during session, because I want them to tell me, is it sweet? Is it salt? Is it yummy? Is it yucky? Why don't you like it? Is it too hard? I mean, if we don't have the language to convey our relationship with the food,
Mm-hmm.
then we don't have the tools to be able to grow that psychosocial piece. Like you're fighting with your hand tied behind your back, but being able to describe the food, being able to tell me what you love about your favorite food, that's huge. Because once we have that, as you would say, Erin, a meaningful connection, once
Yeah.
we have that connection, you have a foundation of bedrock. You can go anywhere from there.
And yeah, it's meaning making. Like I talk out, like
Yeah.
I'm almost finished. Hopefully by the time this podcast comes out, I'll be finished. But I'm working on like a caregiver new clinician called Nourishing Meaningful Meal Times. Like, how do I make mealtime more meaningful? And how many of
Mhm.
the children we work with sit at the table and get food put on their plate?
Yep.
They don't know how it's made,
Yep.
but actually making the food may be challenging for them because of their sensory differences, and that's okay. And how many of our specifically neurodivergent children have need to understand things on a very deep level. So getting to pick the ingredients out of the grocery store and seeing, oh, these are all the things that go into this, allow us to break apart and have a better understanding of what is even getting to our plate. And those are all really valid goals because those are all a part of mealtime. If we only write goals about what a child is actually putting in their mouth or touching or smelling, that really limits us and that really limits that child. And I try to write goals sensitive to the fact that we're all going to learn about food differently. So I use the example of like, I like to smell my food. And a lot of that is because smell and taste are so connected. But I remember being at like restaurants with my nana, and there, you know, when you get the bowl of rolls, but they're different rolls, like I would smell it and she'd be like, well, Erin, that's kind of not polite. But that was how I learn about food. And once I feel like it smells okay, I'm comfortable to taste it. I don't need to touch it for me to feel comfortable. Visually seeing it is usually enough for me. Some kids need to touch it, some kids don't. It depends on themselves. Yeah.
Wait, did you ever see Everybody Loves Raymond?
Briefly, yeah.
Okay, my kid sister loves that show. I never really liked it, but I saw the episode where the older brother, Raymond's older brother, who's a police officer, whenever he had a new food, he would take it and touch it to his chin before he touched it to his mouth. And as a therapist watching this episode, I'm like, this is a grown man with a pediatric feeding disorder. But like, it was just very, I know I'm old, y'all, but somebody out there has also seen
Yeah.
that episode and knows exactly what I'm talking about. But that, I've seen kids do that when
Yeah.
they're trying to experience the food. They'll bring it to their face or they stick their finger in it before they put it to their mouth because that's how they engage with the food.
Yeah. And so that's why when I talk mealtime literacy, it's like, what's their pathway? Because if we can pull out all the stops to get them to try one new food, okay. But if they don't know how they got there, they didn't have the motivation to get there, it wasn't in the context of how they learned, they can't take it somewhere else.
Mhm.
I want them
Mhm.
to know, hey, when I tried this new food with Miss Erin, I really was inclined to smell it. And so maybe it'll be safe if I smell the next food. I talk a lot, I write goals a lot for like curiosity cues because so many of our kids are so subtle with how they show interest in food. And so I'll
Mhm.
even write a goal for caregiver, like caregiver will acknowledge and respond to curiosity cues during mealtime. So like, and I film a lot because I do floor time. So floor time encourages you to film, and I'll use it as an example. Like I you're not supposed to have favorite patients, but I'm obsessed with this child. And we were making a smoothie. And we watched a show while we were making the smoothie because we had watched a show about how to make a smoothie before and then he saw it, he goes, I want to do that. So I knew he was comfortable. He had that. As we're making the smoothie, I'm like giving him choices. I'm allowing him to decide what he wants to do, what he's comfortable doing, what I'm comfortable doing. We have a strong relationship. And I really quickly saw him like lean over to the yogurt. I was like, oh, do you want to smell it? He was like, yeah. I wasn't telling him smell the yogurt. I was responding to his cue. And how many times do we have kids and the caregiver will say, oh, they pointed to that tomato at the grocery store, but like, I don't think they want to eat it. And you're like, did
But they
you
want to look at
try?
it.
But they
Yeah.
looked at it. They were curious. So many times kids will have interest in food for reasons we don't know why, and we have to be open to those points of curiosity. It could be so subtle as them looking at something, and if we don't respond to their communication, they lose it. It's like our kids that whisper before they say things out loud. So
Yes.
caregivers acknowledging their whispering, and I write goals for that because then you can write in your note, say there was a moment where that child reached for something and the caregiver is like, I don't think they want it. You can write in your note, SLP spent session like talking with caregiver about subtle cues of interest for food and how they can be responsive to that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm spending my session doing it, so why don't I write a goal for it?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the goals that we've talked about kind of align with the psychosocial domain and are tiptoeing into the feeding skill, because meal prep is part of feeding skill. If you're going to put it in your body, you've got to have that. It's very helpful if you know how to put it on the table first, right?
Yep.
One of the things that I have, how do we chart and write goals to support the medical domain? And that is key, because those of us that have done this for a while, we know that these children are not avoiding foods or avoiding textures without reason. There is always a medical etiology or a reason for why they are behaving and presenting the way that they are, right?
Which is not just a tongue tie.
Yeah.
I had a patient this week that was told they have a tongue tie. This child was refusing solids for months, comes to see me. I was like, he's refusing for a reason. I think we need to see an allergist.
Mm-hmm.
He is allergic to egg white, walnut, fish. And that was only blood. We have blood tests. We haven't even tested everything else. And
God.
yeah,
But
anyway.
it was a tongue tie. Okay. All right.
Sorry.
We've done that episode. I'm just going to giggle and transition on. Okay. But when you have the kid, I had an eval last week that is reminiscent of the EOE little one that I saw back in South Carolina. That child, it was so much, the similarities in the cases were so pronounced that my heart hurt. Like, I laid my eyes on the kid and my heart started aching for him. So the little guy that I worked with back in South Carolina, who is probably in kindergarten now or first grade, which is wild and makes me happy. Anywho, I get called in because it's behavioral, it's picky eating. I got to see my colleague's discharge report from the hospital when he was inpatient, that it was behavioral, that he threw a tantrum in the high chair and just refused to eat. I got to see the documentation of caregiver shaming, that the caregiver failed to introduce purees at a timely manner. Everybody's passing the buck on the kid. Well, on eval, the child presented at the one in South Carolina was just over a year of age, was officially medical diagnosis of failure to thrive. We had eczema. We had super thin hair, like baby down hair, but at an age where we should have like toddler hair, like robust hairline. And that's what this child looked like last week. I mean, we looked sick. So I wrote a goal for this child that caregivers will follow up with pediatric allergists and pediatric GI, because they've got to follow up with the specialist for the child. And I already left a message for the pediatrician, who I adore. But come to find out, the child back in South Carolina, after they did an EGD, they were immediately given a feeding tube because it was the worst case of EOE, eosinophilic esophagitis, that the GI had ever seen. Like, the kid's esophagus was starting to get like permeable and holy because of how bad the EOE was. Now, I'm not saying that the child I eval'd is going to have that, but case histories, presentations are so similar.
Mm-hmm.
I can only, as a therapist, progress a child so far, right? But they've got to be at a safe point of healing, which means the caregivers have to advocate and follow up with the specialist to get to be on board, right? Also, knowing what I know, it feels unethical for me to push for aggressive intensive therapy when the child's presenting with major medical etiologies. And if the caregivers are not willing to follow through or participate in additional consults, then I don't think it's appropriate for me to do therapy. And I will discharge for these bases because of my past clinical experiences, right? So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm kind of waiting with bated breath to see, because honestly, based on what I saw, I think the child needs a feeding tube. Truth of the matter being, we were way too tiny. Way too tiny. And remember, a feeding tube has a place, but I have written goals that the child will participate in an instrumental swallow eval when I see a case and it looks like there's frank overt signs, symptoms of aspiration, and it looks like we're drowning. Then yes, I will write that goal. I will even hold off on therapy until after an instrumental swallow eval has been completed, because of concerns for patient safety. And you can put that in your plan of care, and that is a measurable goal. Either they do the eval or they don't do the eval. It's black and white there.
Mm-hmm. And for people who are saying, okay, well, I'm still working on feeding skill. How do I write a feeding skill goal? What I will say is, like, we're pretty good at writing those goals, right? Like, child will demonstrate diagonal chew with their, IDC level 7.
Rotary chew
Without,
pattern.
yeah. What I think we need to be adding to those goals is what support you're giving that child.
Yes.
What support are you providing for that child? Child will demonstrate rotary chew when given adequate seating support, in the context of positive feeding environment and with preferred food. Like, what support are you giving that child in order to get to that point? Because unfortunately, I see a lot of clinicians writing these goals and doing the same thing and hoping that that child's just going to, like, magically, yes, practice and experience dependent neuroplasticity, and I want to be doing the thing I'm doing to get better, but how are we supporting that child? Something that is I think constantly missed in feeding is the relationship and the affect that you're using within the context of mealtime. Kids can do much harder things when it's a relationship-based connection and when you're providing this, like, positive coding of information. So, like, when I make something more fun and more enjoyable, they're more likely to do that, or to push themselves and create challenge. And so I want to write in my goals what support I'm providing. So if I'm working with an infant and I want them, I work with a lot of NICU grads that leave the NICU and they're aspirating and they're only taking 10 mLs 3 times a day to practice to prepare for a swallow study. So child will engage in drinking 10 mLs from Dr. Brown preemie nipple with side-lying position and pacing every 5 sucks without signs of aspiration or stress cues. So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I remember being taught everything had to be at 80% accuracy, right? That's how I was. But like, Erin and I just recorded Carolyn Dolby, and she made a point in the podcast recording that she goes, I don't want them aspirating 20% of the time. But for those of us that are gray haired, of course course we don't want them aspirating 20% of the time, but it's there are
80% is
some
great
goals.
for articulation.
Pardon? What did you say?
80% is great for articulation goals.
Yes, beautiful for word retrieval, for some cognitive rehab goals. I mean, some of them you just want them to be safe, but like this is in circumstances like this, that 80% rule is
Yeah.
antiquated methodology. So if you're listening, you can let it go.
Okay. So another thing I think is really important. So I'm writing that goal for that child. What am I writing the goal for the caregiver? This, especially with bottle feeding, this is a mutual experience. So caregiver will respond to refusal or stress cues of child during bottle feeding. With that, I may give them 80%. I want them to do 100%, but like they may still need a little bit of support. So am I monitoring that? And then I can talk about how, patient may have had, one coughing episode, but I coached caregiver to make sure to pace. We used that information to talk about pacing every 3 sucks as opposed to every 10 because they were pushing them a little bit more. So I challenge you to, with every goal you write for the child, write a goal for the caregiver or for yourself. I even write goals for like SLP will utilize diagnostic therapy to determine best AAC support for a child during mealtime. And so that's where I can put in there like, trialed this today. I understood this about child. This is why I tried this other thing, where instead of putting it just in our AAC report, like we're putting it in our report we don't give ourselves enough credit as speech pathologists for all the skilled things we're doing that we don't document. And that's where goals can also be helpful. Like, why am I not writing a goal for everybody that's on this child's team to support them within their plan of care? And I will also say, if you're starting to work with a child, and this is just my shtick, I want a goal for you to write about that child consistently communicating any refusals and you and that caregiver acknowledging it, especially our medically complex children.
Yes.
Because their refusals may look very different. And I work with a lot of kids also who are non-ambulatory, who need to be fed by somebody else. And that lends itself to a lot of risk of trauma. So I'm writing goals for that caregiver to honor their refusals and for me to work to understand all their refusal cues. Because if they can't refuse, I'm not starting feeding therapy. And the amount of times I watch even videos of speech therapists showing feeding therapy where that child is very clearly refusing and they're instead talking about that bite that they took, I find it really hard to watch. But they're doing it based off of that goal. Oh, they met that goal. They took that bite. Whereas if I wrote a goal for, they showed a refusal cue and caregiver responded to it, that's progress. But we're looking at progress in two different areas. So make sure you're
Defining it differently.
defining it differently. Yes. So it can really help you engage in therapy that you want to engage in if you shift the way that you're writing goals. Again, goals are really challenging, but they can be a very big key for your sessions and how you actually do things and being trauma informed for that child. Because man, like, especially if that child's non-speaking, like, do they even want to eat? They may not. And that's okay. But like, we also have to know our role in that. Like, it is okay if that child doesn't want to eat. And let's
There's a
learn
place for a
about
feeding
that.
tube.
There's a place for a feeding tube. There's a place for having a conversation with a caregiver about what their goals really are and why is feeding so important for you. If the caregiver is saying this is one thing I feel like I can do for them, maybe we can look and see other things that they can feel supportive of that child. So again, being really trauma informed in making sure that that child has choice and empowerment and body autonomy is a big piece. And I'll write goals for child will communicate refusal in order to support body autonomy during mealtime, and then talk about why body autonomy is really important. So you may think, oh man, that child's not eating anything. Like, I'm not doing anything for them as a feeding therapist, when you're very clearly teaching them to have body autonomy, advocate for themselves. And that's bigger than feeding.
I have a middle of the road goal that I like to work on, and it has some murder vocab, and that's how I always phrase it to the parents, and which always makes them giggle. Murder vocab. We have a cat that commits murder. We call her our murder kitty. Birds, not humans. Clarification. Now I know why Augusta County PD was driving through my subdivision. They were looking for Fatty Patty. But, y'all, sorry, Fatty Patty's the cat. Anyways, back to murder vocab goal. But I like to write a goal that child will stab or pierce food and feed it to a caregiver, because if they're not willing to engage with that food to feed a loved one, then they probably won't want to feed it to themselves. And that's not right for all of my patients, again, to be trauma informed. But for some of my patients, that's a huge start. That's a huge win. I've had in home health, I've had them practice feeding the dog, and that's a goal. They will partake in mealtime routines for pet, for exposure to, fill in wet food, dry food, if we're working on textures. But it's embracing the concept of mealtime, embracing the concept of new textures. But I've had a lot of wins here recently with toddlers and young children wanting to feed their loved ones or feed my little girl that I talked about at the beginning. Remind me of the word, not selective mutism, situational mutism. It's gonna need to rewire brain. I love that. So
Mhm.
much more appropriate. I wonder how they're going to change the ICD-10 code for that diagnosis.
Yeah, it's not
Um,
yet.
yeah,
Yeah, but
but I mean, it's appropriate, but I'm just kind of curious as to like how long that will take to trickle down. Squirrel, neither here nor there. But she likes to feed the baby. So mom really wanted to grow her food inventory. And one of this child's goals was mom wanted her to have X amount of foods in the course of 3 months. This is a lofty goal. So I trailed it back to, all right, let's work on adding maybe 3 foods in 3 months. And for her, it was healthy and reasonable. I'm happy to report we hit 5. But we started the introduction of a novel food with a known comfortable food, and we started by spoon feeding her baby brother. And that was huge because previously she didn't really want to engage with said little sibling, but feeding mommy, feeding baby, sprinkle oatmeal. How much fun is sprinkle oatmeal? Shell, that's what they call me at work. Shell has a very large bowl of sprinkles, and then I scoop some out and put it in the oatmeal. And this is, man, sprinkles fix a lot of problems on a lot of fronts as a general rule of thumb. Just putting that thought out there in life. Not good on blueberry pie though. But
Mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
but that's a good goal for this child in this situation.
Right,
Now,
right.
I have other children. If we're going to tiptoe into the psychosocial overlapping with the medical domains of PFD, I have a little friend who diagnosis of Down syndrome, dual diagnosis of ASD, was having such bad anxiety spells that we were completely shutting down, collapsing in the floor. And the caregiver reached out to psych and actually started Zoloft for this little one. And for him, it was clinically warranted. All of a sudden, he felt confident and across the board, OT, PT, speech, mom homeschools, but has resources at the school. We saw growth in all area. And then the trial prescription ran out and we were off of it for like 4 days. And all of us saw dramatic regressions. So the mom was very candid that this child, because of his unique profile, as well as, anxiety runs in families, y'all. We know that. I say that as we're actively looking for a counselor for Bear to help him with his social anxiety because it's, bless his heart, it's kicking his butt right now. And this will work through this, but it's got my mommy heart worried. But I mean, it is. it's a component that is outside of my scope of practice for my son and for this patient. But wow, what a change when he is in a safely medicated state. And he is, that child, as his mama said, he is feeling himself today. So I'm like, God, but he does. He comes in and he's just like on it. And we're actually getting ready to discharge. He's added like 15 or 20 new foods in the span of like 2 months. But like every texture, every viscosity, it wasn't me. It wasn't the magic trick. I made food fun as we were learning about it, but he needed the support of psychiatry and his pediatrician. Like we had to work in interprofessional practice in order to make our goals work. So, moral of the story, your goals are going to be different for each case scenario. But somehow all of our episodes tie back to interprofessional practice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So, what other thoughts, love?
I don't know. I think you really have to look at like your core values. And if you're wanting to do trauma informed neurodiversity affirming, like you have to know what that means and you have to do the work. And then you have to look at your goals and say, does this fit that? I also love, there's a positive psychology has a framework about taking your 5 strengths and then finding the thing that's the hardest and utilizing your 5 strengths in those. So if you have a child working on feeding therapy, talk with that caregiver. What are the strengths of this child? And let's use those to help them in whatever way they want to with food. I think that's the other thing, like, and why when I talk about mealtime literacy, it's not a like neurotypical mealtime, but it's more of a like understanding of my body, myself, what I want to do, how, how I want to engage in mealtime. And a lot of what we end up doing is like working with caregivers to better understand their child and what they need and giving them permission, because we both know there's a lot of crazy things that are happening in the feeding world. And there's unfortunately a lot of caregiver shame that is happening. Your child's not doing this because of this, and you just need to do this, and you just need to do this. And I think our job a lot of times is to peel back that and say, let's look at your family. Let's look at your child. Let's look at you. Let's not listen to the noise of whatever else is happening. And unfortunately for feeding, it's our view of mealtime is very ableist in how we view it. And there's not a lot of representation of what feeding looks like. You see things on TV of like people who have to have their food separated, but like that's really the most that I've seen from any representation of a different way of engaging with food. And so that means we have to think outside the box, but that means there's a lot of relearning that has to happen. And that's okay. In the Floor Time conference, I had a caregiver ask me, she was like, making my child's food is really dysregulating for me because of my sensory system, and we don't like the same foods.
Yes.
And so I don't know this family very well because it was just a question, but sometimes you have to then have a conversation of, is your child old enough to make their own food? Can we support their independence so you don't get dysregulated? And maybe you guys eat separately and that's okay, but then you find other moments to connect after that. Maybe mealtime is let's take our own time, let's eat, let's nourish our bodies, and then let's connect on things that we enjoy. And giving caregivers permission for that can also be really helpful. But again, being trauma informed and neurodiversity affirming, it's not just this thing that you get that you say you are. It's a constant working of understanding differences of a person, acknowledging those differences and not trying to fix them, but trying to support them. And so I really do, like we said at the beginning, your goals are going to change. Like you're going to learn more about this child and you might change what goal you write. You may recognize something that is going to better support them than what you thought initially. And that's okay. You don't have to wait to the 6-month mark. You can document in a note per, understand, even like, you might learn about something that does cause trauma for them that you're like, I can't do that anymore. And then you write in your plan of care, your use of trauma-informed care and the importance of that to make mealtime positive. It sounds like more work, But it's not, because you might have been doing is writing these goals that don't fit, and then you're having to write all this other information in your notes anyway. So it's just,
It's
where
just
do you want to? Yeah.
my last couple of last closing thoughts is we are not guaranteed tomorrow. We're not. And as fragile as we all are, God forbid something should happen and somebody else pick your kid up. Or what happens if the
I
child's
was like, where are
family
you going
gets
with this?
deployed? Pardon?
I was like, where are you going with this? It got
Oh,
dark.
I know. Well, I mean, I thought I was dying there for a few weeks. So I've been in dark places. I'm through it. We're good. I'm healthy. Thank you, Jesus. But
Maybe you just move jobs and somebody has
y-
to pick their kid up too. That could
yes,
happen.
yes, that happens. Or
Maybe.
somebody like deployed or they move or
Right,
life.
right,
But
right.
your goals that you've written, that that document is going to transfer with them. That
Mhm.
document is somebody else's starting plan. And think how awe-inspiring it would be if you wrote smashing freaking goals and it goes to a novice clinician or it
Mhm.
goes to a seasoned clinician that's new to feeding and it inspires them to write goals in this new way.
Yeah.
Or
To ask
your
questions.
yes,
I
to
use goal writing in, like, I did evaluations. I don't do as many where I am right now, but I did evaluations. I would write more like strengths based, supportive
yeah,
of delayed echolalia goals. And when someone would pick up that kid, oftentimes they would reach out and say, hey, I hadn't heard of Gestalt language processing. Can you explain this more to me? Because now they have these goals I've written and it forces them to ask questions. So it can be
yeah,
very powerful too to open up a conversation.
yes. So are your goals measurable to meet whatever payer parameters are set forth, whether that be private pay, insurance, early intervention, whatever? Okay. Are your goals, have you removed ableist and deficits based language from your goals? Are they strengths based? Are they trauma informed? Do they align with patient goals, like what the patient wants to do, the child wants to do, and what the caregiver wants? Do your goals, are your caregivers understanding of maybe long-term prognosis of like different diagnoses, right? Because sometimes there's a mismatch there, give or take, where the caregiver is in their grief cycle, understanding what's going on with their patient, right? Or their child. But like, are those goals, to borrow an Erin word, authentic to you and how you treat as a clinician, authentic to honor the caregiver, and authentic to honor the child? And if you've hit those parameters, it's okay if your goal looks different. Because God help us, if all of our goals were the same, how boring would life be? How static would therapy be? So make them different. Yeah. Yay. Okay. Man, y'all, we have recorded back to back today. I am tired and I really don't know if I need a nap or if I need another cup of coffee, but I have to go type up a ton of podcasts.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yumi, thank you so much for being patient with us as we work through all the 2 to 3 months worth of recordings that we have stashed and now need to start typing. Ta-da!
Mhm.
So, folks, give or take, when you catch us, see Erin live at ASHA, me participating via pre recorded slides. Catch us live at Feeding Matters. Wait, I have to book the hotel room. Are you sleeping with me? I mean, staying with me in the hotel room?
I have to figure that out because I'll
All right.
be,
Oh, Oh, you should bunk with me. I think Tess is sleeping with us too. Good. We'll figure out bedroom bunking situation later, but I'll be presenting live at Feeding Matters in Arizona. So come on and go ahead and plant the seed now. We are both presenting at SHAV, the Speech Hearing Association of Virginia, in March in Richmond. We have to go to the Edgar Allan Poe Pub. It's like my favorite place in town.
Been there.
Yes, and I think our sweet friend Melissa and Renee are going to be there too. So come join us there. And as always, follow us on Instagram. Message us if you think there's a really cool speaker you would like. I made the note that we have to get the woman that you presented at Flowtime on. Yep, fabulous. But y'all, we appreciate you joining us every year. Every year we appreciate you joining us for this. So thank you. Erin, so proud of you, hon. Thanks, hon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's course. To complete the course, you must log into your account and complete the quiz and the survey. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete mailing address in your account profile prior to course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to reflect on your ASHA transcript. Please note that if this information is missing, we cannot submit to ASHA on your behalf. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you next time.
Feeding Matters guides system-wide changes by uniting caregivers, professionals, and community partners under the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Alliance. So what is this alliance? The Alliance is an open access collaborative community focused on achieving strategic goals within 3 focus areas: education, advocacy, and research. So who is the Alliance? It's you. The Alliance is open to any person passionate about improving care for children with a pediatric feeding disorder. To date, 187 professionals, caregivers, and partners have joined the Alliance. You can join today by visiting the Feeding Matters website at www.feedingmatters.org. Click on PFD Alliance tab and sign up today. Change is possible when we work together. That's a wrap, folks. Once again, thank you for listening to First Bite, fed, fun, and functional. I am your humble but yet sassy host, Michelle Dawson, the All Things Peds SLP. This podcast is part of a course offered for continuing education through speechtherapypd.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about CEU opportunities for this episode, as well as the ones that are archived. And as always, remember, feed your mind, feed your soul, be kind, and feed those babies.
Right.